Hi, Susanna.
Hi there, Ian. How are you today?
I'm very excited.
That's good.
I'm very excited today's podcast because I've just come out of watching a great show, and it reminded me of the sort of the interesting aspects of social media, podcasting, and history. History's my great love, and we were on vacation with the kids, and we were watching a TV show, how William Shatner changed the world. And it was on the Disney, not the Disney, they probably should have been. It was on I think it was on the Science Fiction Channel or the History Channel on cable. But literally, the title is How William Shatner Changed the World. And he's a phenomenal, I've got a lot of time for William Shatner, very funny guy, and obviously a great actor in his day. But what it was about was how Star Trek changed the world. And you, I know, have followed this through with some of the searching on the internet as well as some blogs on it. But the concept is amazing. When Star Trek came out in the 60s and 70s, what was happening was the show came out with an easy example was they had a low budget and they couldn't figure out how to transport the actors down to the planets when they go to visit the planets. In the first few episodes, they didn't have a way, and they didn't have any money to build a new unit that would look like a spaceship from the spaceship. So the writers came up with the idea of transponders, and that you transport. And if you ever watch Star Trek, they actually transport you down to the planet that they're visiting, and it came literally out of running out of money. And it reminded me of podcasting and blogging and so forth, where we buy modest equipment and we manage to put onto the internet for a vast audience at very little cost. Yes. So that was sort of neat. And the other link to social media that blew me away was this: that Star Trek, its script and its dialogue was developed over time, in large part, they said on the show, from the viewer mail. And after the first couple episodes, what was happening is that they were getting feedback, and they were saying, "Oh my gosh, this is unbelievable!" And doctors and scientists were writing back because of the science fiction part of it, and they'd say, "You know what would be really neat is if you could wave a wand over your body and get a sense of what's in your body for any injuries." Well, that is the beginnings of what the really smart guys at MIT developed into ultrasound. And the concepts, those are the kinds of concepts were developed as a result of viewer feedback. Now, this was all done by snail mail, but it parallels exactly what social media is, and that is that we get that feedback for free. And the writers were incorporating these ideas into the storylines, and it was phenomenal. And so I was really struck by the linkage of social media and how really all social media is that we've just funneled it through the internet. But it isn't any different than the way a lot of shows, a lot of things are creative, and that is the creative gene in us and the creative juices in us are developed by interaction and free exchange of information and exploring beyond what we thought we could explore. And the last point is, I think when we started podcasting, we never thought that we would be able to do it essentially this easily with such impact in terms of our daily practice. So anyway, that's my little rant on how social media really isn't social media. It's the same as it was as always. It's just the way that human nature exchanges, but the venue has changed through the internet.
That's right.
All right, so let's wind up our Being Specific series today with a comment on really the last stage of how things unfold.
And Ian, we've talked on previous podcasts about the different stages of litigation, of what the anticipated range, albeit sometimes quite wide, of the costs associated with each stage would be. And we talked most recently just about the different kinds of motions that can arise at different points in the litigation. But once you've gone through this, the litigation organization, once you've gone through the mediation and the discoveries, then typically we will get to a pretrial stage. And a pretrial stage, as we all know, is when we meet with a judge with all the the counsel and the parties, and the judge gives us their preliminary assessment of what our case is worth, in a sense, or who's going to be successful, or what's going to ultimately happen in a judicial determination.
And in most of our cases, that has to happen. It's sort of like the final chance to settle the case. You get a neutral judge who will not hear the case ultimately, so frank discussion can occur. It is a type of mediation with judicial intervention and can be tremendously impactful. But a new cost layer onto this. And again, we don't know how effective the judge will be, how active they'll be. They sometimes will say, look, let's spend a day doing this, or let's spend an hour. So in terms of budgeting and uncertainty, you've got to add that into it. You're going to spend, a certain range, depending on, you're going to spend at least $5,000 probably to run the pretrial process by the time you've prepared your briefs, attended, and reported back to the client and so forth. And sometimes it can expand beyond that.
That's for sure. And then if a pretrial is ultimately unsuccessful, then of course you are facing a trial. And the costs of that, I'm sure people are quite surprised how expensive every single day of a trial really is.
Well, you look at a trial, and I always say to my clients, if you're going to budget a trial, budget my time full time for the same amount of time of attendances for preparation as well. So if it's a 5-day trial, you're going to have at least 5 days of my time on the preparation side, and in a big case, many more days than that. And then you're going to need to really factor in how long the trial is going to be. Can you budget it with that in that respect as well? And really, at that point, it's just a guessing game.
Yeah. And it can be quite expensive. I mean, we know that if you've got witnesses who are experts who have to be on standby as well, they have to be compensated properly, and they've got to be there, possibly on hold every day of the trial as well until they're ultimately called, because we can't control part of the timing process sometimes. And another cost, again, not necessarily expected, but certainly can be quite high.
Well, that's right. I mean, if you have a doctor who's your expert or something, and you have to pay them an hourly wage to wait around, that adds up on top of the professional fees for lawyers and and the staff that the lawyers are going to use for the purposes of the trial itself. So that's the happy thought of tens of thousands of dollars. I mean, we're into crazy money on the trial itself, and I guess the final stage and the final point, which brings tremendous uncertainty in result and costs, is the appeal itself. And certainly in Ontario and in many jurisdictions, we have essentially 3 more levels that certainly in the States area, we can go to divisional court, we could then go to the Court of Appeal, and then we can go to the Supreme Court of Canada, all of which are tremendous, ordering transcripts, significant costs, but the results are also significant in that cost orders really don't reflect what it actually cost at the trial, and nor even more so at the appeals level. So you're basically paying whatever, you're topping up whatever your professionals are going to get, even if you win, which is an uncertainty in itself. You're not going to get your full recovery on costs throughout the appeal period typically.
And costs, we've said previously, are completely discretionary to a judge. So even if you have a full slam dunk win, you may not necessarily be vindicated with reimbursement of your legal fees. And that's where people, I find, are most disappointed. But Ian, just sort of as we move towards wrapping this up, I came across a really interesting blog post just recently. It was actually May 19th. There is a blog in the U.S. called the New York Probate and Estate Litigation blog, and it's prepared and done by Philip Bernstein. It's a fantastic blog, and I recommend anyone to it. And it was just kind of interesting to see, it just came to my attention because we were talking about this mini-series on costs of litigation. And in New York, as you probably know, Ian, there generally is a requirement that litigants pay their own counsel fees. And that's regardless of the success factor, which, I know certainly we're moving more towards here in Ontario and other jurisdictions as well. And Philip was just pointing to a case where the surrogate court actually upheld the exact finding that even though in a situation where trustees were compelled to pass their accounts, they did so, and there were some objections that were raised by some beneficiaries, other beneficiaries didn't. The beneficiaries who objected, but turned out, objected improperly, albeit because everything that the trustees had done was vindicated. The beneficiaries who had the trust fund ultimately reduced because of costs and because of the expenses incurred, moved to have the the objecting beneficiaries pay the costs of this defending of the accounts. And the judge there just said, no, we're not going to do that. You know, each beneficiary, each litigant is going to bear their own costs, and we're not going to penalize, as we would, you know, the loser pays kind of principle that we see in some jurisdictions. So it's interesting to see that, you know, people can litigate and still, they can completely win, they can completely be vindicated, but have the cost still associated with that at the end of the day.
Well, I really, it's interesting, and I highly recommend that blog. I get it daily, and it's fantastic. Well, thanks very much.
Thank you.